first of all, I don't want you to be embarrassed. So please, turn off your cell phones right this very moment. Also, I just wanted to let you know about some upcoming events. You know, we have events sometimes nearly every night. A few of the ones that I think might be of particular interest to this audience is Jerry Staal, who's coming on Thursday at 7:30. And if you haven't heard him read, he just gives an absolutely great performance every time. He's a lot of fun to hear. We also have Amy Spalding, who is a local, and she does a lot of improv. It's her first young adult book, and I know that Dana Goodyear promotes a lot of young adult books, and hearing that she does improv also, I think, will make that a fun and lively event. And of course, we also have Marissa Silver, who will be here in April, another New Yorker writer, and quite a wonderful writer, who I think a lot of you may know yourselves. Lastly, we have started a new program here at Skylight, much like NPR, a membership program called Friends with Benefits. And if you sign up, you get 20% off all the in-store bestsellers and 10% off everything in the store. So it's a nice way to support the whole independent bookstore culture. But we are here today, of course, to celebrate the second book of poetry from poet Dana Goodyear. It's her second book, but the first one to be centered in Los Angeles, even though she writes for The New Yorker, oftentimes about food in both a very exciting but sometimes very horrifying way. She's one of us now. She is an Angelino, and you know, I had read that The New Yorker has more subscribers in California than they have in New York. What does it say about us? I think in addition to our famous good looks, we are incredibly intelligent here in Los Angeles. And so let's welcome Dana Goodyear. Her poems have been called Stripped Down, Ignited, Utterly Original, Relentless, Sympathetic, Diaristic, and Enthralling.
Thank you so much. To Skylight for having me here tonight, to all of you for coming, to my son Remy for being in the audience. It's interesting, this is the first time that I've had a child in the room, not in the womb, at a reading. I have read here pregnant, but I was thinking about it on the way over here, how, yeah, I am talking into the microphone, how I knew it would be a very charged and special reading for me because of Remy's presence, but also how it brings up a lot of the issues that I'm interested in poetry and how you use private language in a public space. And so it sort of got me thinking that that's in fact I think what a lot of the drive to write poetry comes from in me, is an investigation of how that works and what can be said up from private life in public, and how coded is too coded, and what is the point really of trying to communicate the nuances of an individual experience. So that's one aspect of what the book, The Oracle of Hollywood Boulevard, is about. It's also about living in a city, an incredibly fascinating, challenging city, and the ways that private experience basically, those are the little shoots for each poem, comes out of something that from my own life, but the seedbed is Los Angeles, and there's been so much good writing about this city that I don't, I hardly need to add a layer to that, or try to add a layer to that. I thought I might start tonight by reading something that Christopher Isherwood wrote about Los Angeles. He is one of the many writers who found a true writing home here in LA. But one other thing I don't want to forget to say is that this book was in the works for a long time. It's been 7 years since my first book was published, and I wanted the poems in the book to be in the world for a number of reasons, but a very central reason is that I wanted this cover to be in the world, and the artist who made this is here tonight. where are you? Francesca Gaviani made this incredibly beautiful cover, and she's an artist working in Los Angeles that I love and admire so much, and I actually wrote some of the poems in the book toward this picture and this idea of LA, so I'm so happy that it's here, and she's here, and that her son is here too. So I'm going to start with this is just a little piece of a sort of a sketch of LA written by Christopher Isherwood in 1947. Just sort of to set the mood, and so that I'm not only reading my own work tonight, which is always sort of feels wrong. To sanely live in Los Angeles, or I suppose in any other large American city, you have to cultivate the art of you have to cultivate the art of staying awake. You must learn to resist, firmly but not tensely, the unceasing hypnotic suggestions of the radio, the billboards, the movies and the newspapers, those demon voices which are forever whispering in your ear what you should desire, what you should fear, what you should wear and eat and drink and enjoy, what you should think and do and be. They have planned a life for you, from the cradle to the grave and beyond, which it would be easy, fatally easy to accept. The least wandering of the attention, the least relaxation of your awareness, and already the eyelids begin to droop. The eyes grow vacant, the body starts to move in obedience to the hypnotist's command. Wake up, before you sign that 7-year contract, buy that house you don't really want, marry that girl you secretly despise. Don't reach for the whiskey, that won't help you. You've got to think, to discriminate, to exercise your own free will and judgment. And you must do this, I repeat, without tension, quite rationally and calmly. For if you give way to fury against the hypnotists, if you smash the radio and tear the newspaper to shreds, you'll only rush to the other extreme and fossilize into defiant eccentricity. Hollywood's two polar types are the cynically drunken writer aggressively nursing a 10-year-old reputation and the theatrically self-conscious hermit who strides the boulevard in sandals, homemade shorts, and a prophetic beard, muttering against the age of machines. 65 years ago, right? An afternoon drive from Los Angeles will take you up into the high mountains, where eagles circle above the forests and the cold blue lakes, or out over the Mojave Desert with its weird vegetation and immense vistas. Not very far away are Death Valley and Yosemite, and the sequoia forest with its giant trees which were growing long before the Parthenon was built. They are the oldest living things in the world. One should visit such places often and be conscious in the midst of the city of their surrounding presence. For this is the real nature of California and the secret of its fascination, this untamed, undomesticated, aloof, prehistoric landscape which relentlessly reminds the traveler of his human condition and the circumstance of his tenure upon the earth. You're perfectly welcome, it tells him, during your short visit. Everything is at your disposal. Only I must warn you, if things go wrong, don't blame me. I accept no responsibility. I'm not part of your neurosis. Don't cry to me for safety. There is no home here. There is no security in your mansions or your fortresses, your family vaults or your banks or your double beds. Understand this fact and you will be free. Accept it and you will be happy. So that is probably, I think he wrote it as a little trivial thing in a travel magazine, and I think it's one of the most profound things written about Los Angeles that I've ever read. I am going to read a couple of poems from my first book, Honey and Junk, and I think I can do without the microphone. I think this is just fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a little less awkward for me. So I'm going to start with Oasis, which is a poem that I always need to gloss when I'm reading it on the East Coast, because there you have to tell everybody what an Arnold Palmer is, but I think that I can be confident in knowing that you guys know what that is. Oasis. We found, like the deserting, spacious calm, drank a pair of Arnold Palmers underneath a palm, went for massage and mud, lacquer, love, overheated minerals, a stimulating rub. Then, as if it could be used, as if for art, I placed a grain of doubt in your open-pored heart and watched what had been small dilate and everything else evaporate. This is called Separate People. I've been beside you all night like soaked windows, like the iron fence around a city park, like the hedge whose gray-green musk and webs remind you of Greenwich, solitary morning prayer, the country club policy on Jews. That's why I'm a mountain. I'm cold and pointy at the top, I said, asleep, the Oracle of Hollywood Boulevard. Your sad question, where were we? Then, knowing that you weren't, was I there? This is one of the Francesca Gabbiani poems, Freeway. Alongside this, a river. Somewhere headwaters, somewhere a mouth. It begins with thought and ends with speech, while the road just drains and drains, gray, nervous miles. I drive all day under a strike surface scratched by skywriters' mistakes. Through the city bleeding silver like a video game, past Nadaland, past Mojave, toward the bodies decomposing in the quiet valleys killers used to ranch. Behind me, in my mind, the lurid birds of paradise bend their orange faces toward the pool to drink, but the pool is full of flames, and the trees are ash shadows, and the skies so dark, night-blooming whites release themselves to moths too singed to reach them. The yellow vine presses its wax ear against the warping glass, and the deck chairs, pale and worked as skeletons, somehow hold their ground. Just go in order. Conception. This time of year, the snakes leave their old skins hanging in the Meyer lemon tree. Afterbirth, carcass, or nude hose. Choose life, says the hand-drawn sign at the edge of that almond-pale, crystal-pink grove on Interstate 5. A poll of teenagers in Hollywood asks, what is the opposite of youth? Overwhelmingly, they answer, death. Meanwhile, in the magic garden, the grass begins to build a crusty yellow tip. Ice forms on the volcano's lip. The cone hole yawns clean. Inject clear liquid where I mark the X. We are late, e.g. these bruised white blossoms on the ground. My eyes are turning dull. Soon I'll bite my handler and glide out into morning, beaded, self-made, listening. That's a poem that I use to scare my friends who are afraid of snakes. This poem has a sort of a fancy title, Objet Petit A, which is, I guess, according to Wikipedia, it's a term that means the object of desire. I might have just called it the object of desire, but I didn't. Remember its pulse on the salt-swollen porch, both body and gash, that starfish she rescued, stranded when found on the winter beach, a hand pantomiming kleptomania. Stop, thief. Slick, warm red clot. Who knew what it meant by living? It should have turned hard into ornament, but stayed wet like guilt. This is a group of 10 little poems that are sort of feel like the spine of the book to me. It's called The Singing Bowl. Hysteric. In the eaves of the glass house on the cliff, a globe light goes on. Miles down, I'm the girl in the rushes at the beginning of the film, or the animal whose vertebra found in a dry creek bed someone will make a whistle of. Make believe. Beside the white garage where the dog was chained and the lady mannequin lived alone, weaving God's eye spider webs between her slender forefinger and thumb, my sister, thinking of a recent sex lesson and how it was said I'd popped out like a watermelon seed, spooned some dirt into her mouth and a slimy black teardrop, the color of the tar that blistered on the gravel drive, and waited. Old wives' tale. Want, don't drink, get drunk, never anymore think, wake in the night and insist. The last flower is the best, some fool told you in your despair. Now you carry the phrase in your wallet like a tranquilizer pill. What I know, let's make a baby is only a joke if the man says it, and the bowl only sings empty. The idea of a child like a bonsai, a small, close work representing acres of time. The distant figure standing before you, viewed through the binocular's back end, is made from things that want to fly apart so violently the doctor calls them blasts. Quickening. The cracked blue egg on the step and cast of cold sweat shadow underneath the sycamores when I nearly missed the oncoming car. This marked the beginning of what I thought was motherhood. News. Unloosed, the silver helium balloon flies over fields while the child crouches in the attic, hoping never to be found. My mind cry becomes an infant's, calling, "Stay." It sounds like bleeding. If only you would drink my blood and let me breathe for you. But you are wild and startle at the salt lick. The dreams of pregnant women. This is number 6 if you're getting antsy. It always makes me anxious when someone says, this is an endless series in the middle of my book. We're at number 6. The dreams of pregnant women. Water, talking animals, tall buildings, sex, witnessed crimes, spilled fluids, falling down an elevator shaft, seducing the interrogator, his one fat finger pressed against my lips. There I was, on my knees, wailing, while my mother searched the bedding for the baby and found stained lace dresses and discarded china dolls instead. Her recurring dream, she told me later on the phone, was that she had a baby she forgot to feed. Then, after a pause, I guess I'm the baby. Fairy tale. Thumbelina did not want toad or mole, but loved a sparrow she thought dead, sick girl. Later, she married a prince who lived inside a flower. Sex in Your Garden by Angela Overy says that in every flower lives a woman and a man. The pollen enters the stigma, from the Greek to prick. The danger is selfing. Forgotten in an upstairs room, we came upon a scene of theatrical decay. The once white lilies suffering, petals turned the sulfur purple of dead skin fall into the floor. I thought of myself, shot through with testosterone, magnificent, disoriented, bleeding from the ears, stranded while the surf advanced. Loving the invisible. My sister knew a boy whose mother left. Just moth was tattooed to his chest, a cocoon and the thing that flew from it. As of today, mine has fingerprints and skin that light could pass through, if there were light in there. Ghost heart. The scientist keeps a mouse heart in a glass bulb, a wet, white blob like cotton soaked in alcohol. She washes it with soap to break the old cells down and makes a scaffold for new ones to cleave to. It starts to twitch. It starts to act like it's a heart. In the lab, someone in a white coat shouts, "Doris, it's healing." From life. What is shocking in art, my friend asks. Not sex, we agree, not anymore. Then stop before a rubbery gray tail leading from a mound of dust, a few coarse hairs swept into a pile, a gnarl of foot. No meat, no bones, no face. No, not even this. We pass the flowering elderberry bushes, smelling of sperm. What is shocking, my friend says at last, is to include your children in your art without their consent. Wise lesson. This poem is for a friend of mine who leads a very adventurous life. It's called Mirage. I flew through the night to the city. In the morning it rained. You got in my cab at the corner and we went to your empty apartment, the one with the bed in the living room where you used to stop between refugee camps. On the bed was my quilt. In the bathroom, concealer, a kit. I remember you here with a bug in your leg and blood in your eye. The two of us running, past the cheap chain stores, breathing exhaust and the sweet burnt scent from the carts, to the park, toward the women in carriages, the taken care of. Sidestepping the grip of that calm, whatever drug they were on. But now you are teasing, the red eye like a foreign correspondent, meaning that I too am single-minded and alone. We are spies from opposite deserts, meeting in this third place, opal puddle, glittering spike. At the airport, I'm a suspect, traveling childless with 2 days' worth of milk, leaving already, as you are tonight, for another 6 weeks. Don't get hurt, I say to you just this one time, my dear friend. Be careful. And this is the last poem I'm going to read. And it's called Home. Those last days in Hollywood, where were we going? We didn't know. The Johns came at midnight and flung their broken condoms to the ground. The next day, someone dumped a car seat at our hedge. Growling made it worse, those few times we tried to sleep, curling from the sound of hunger coming through the bedroom wall. The furnace burnt the underbrush, electricity shocked the pool. Dry as hands, the poison leaves of the poison tree flew from the roof. Where one night, years ago, while we watched Play Misty for Me, wind played the fence wire's anguished vocal cords, a lowing loud as a mourning cow. This imperfect world. We're going, we're almost gone. An accident, your globe dashed, blue fragments puzzling the floor, a cosmic question on your face.
So now while we have the chance, I'm sure some of you have a few questions.
I have a few questions for you. Do you have a question? What? Who is here? Claire's here. She is. That's actually what I wanted to say. I'm so happy that so many of my dear friends and people who read this manuscript in many forms over many years are here to celebrate it. It's really nice. It feels like a hometown kind of event. If anyone has any questions, yeah.
Why were you introduced some of your articles you wrote for the New Yorker for food as horrifying?
Oh, why are they? I guess that's a matter of opinion, but I have been writing a lot about food, and I'm particularly interested in the areas of food culture that are really challenging to make the mainstream, and sort of how some extreme practices in dining are influencing what people are doing, what mainstream ordinary eaters are doing. So people who are deliberately eating things that other people think aren't good for them, for instance, or people who are taking enormous risks to eat certain kinds of foods that, risks that might be legal or put them in their lives in some other kind of jeopardy. So that's, yeah, so some of the descriptions of the food can be a little bit gnarly. That's probably why. Yes. Amy, you.
So you're a very noted journalist, and that going with that, you know how to do research, and you're a good researcher. So does any kind of research play a role in your writing poetry?
Well, I do try to have the poems be factually correct. That's actually something that I learned. The first profile I ever wrote for The New Yorker was of Stanley Kunitz, and that was one of his, one of the things he taught his students, and he was such a great teacher, was that, you know, you can't, just because it's nice to have the, I don't know, the heron fishing for a certain kind of fish, because that word fits better into your poem. If it's not the actual, in the diet of the heron, you have to put the real thing. So I have changed a couple of poems based on that. The research, sometimes I do a kind of reporting for poems, though. There's one that I didn't read. I mean, you all might think that I wasn't being sensitive at all to the fact that I have a small child in the room based on the choice of poems that I read, but there's some poems that are worse in the book, and one of them that I didn't read was based on a report, sort of a, it was a little bit of a pseudo-reporting trip, because I knew that I wasn't going to do anything except probably, I was hoping that I would get a poem out of it, kind of thing, to the Doc Johnson factory, which is a sex toy factory in the valley. It's the oldest one in the, right, Claire? It's the oldest one in the U.S. Claire used to cover that industry for the LA Times. So, and it's all, I think that it's a family business, and it's very, you know, it's American made, and so they invited me hoping that I would write something, not a piece of nonfiction about it, but it was just such a great situation because, you know, I had access to this place that was extremely interesting and surprising in lots of ways. So, yeah, I mean, otherwise I just do sort of rudimentary stuff. I mean, I often, in the course of researching something else, I'll get an idea for a poem, though. Adrian?
How often do you draw inspiration from your own experiences versus your observations of other people's experiences? You're a very observant, perceptive person, you know. Do you find that it's more inspiring / easier because there's a separation?
I find that I get in more trouble when I base the poems on my observations of other people. And when I keep it pretty local, I can make amends. So that's kind of what governs it sometimes. But unless you know, a historical figure, or there's a poem in here that's about Hugh Hefner. I don't think he's ever going to find out. I don't think he'd care. But you know, if somebody's pretty far removed, I feel fine about it too. And sometimes those, it can just be imaginatively fun to try to get into those lives. And I do think that comes from my nonfiction writing too. Yeah.
When you're writing, do you find, or do you feel like you need to stick to I guess, any kind of rules of poetry, or do you just let it flow what is coming to you?
Yeah, I don't know, but formal versus,
yeah.
I sometimes get very attracted to rhyme. So I think that that's the most consistent formal device that I use. Mm-hmm. But I don't, and I find, you know, iambic pentameter is pretty natural just because it's English speech pattern. But I sometimes actually try to fight against that so that everything doesn't look like a failed sonnet. But I let myself do pretty much what I feel like doing with the shape of a poem.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any subject matter that you've wanted to cover or want to get closer to but pull back from? Like, is there anything that makes you scared to write about as a
In
journalist
poems,
or
or I think it's a
poet?
lot easier to write about. For me, it's easier to write about personal matters in poems because there's a little bit of a veil because the language is a little bit coded. There's also the protective aspect of the minuscule readership for poetry. So I feel a little bit safer saying things in a poem. Yeah, I don't put myself in my nonfiction in a very obvious way, usually. But, yeah, nothing comes to mind. I mean, obviously sometimes ideas come up and I just sort of think, oh, I can't do that. I wouldn't do a good job on that kind of a piece. Or I write poems that I throw away because I think that they're horrifying. But I can't say that it's really easy, that you can easily break it down into, certain kinds of experiences are just too raw to write about or anything like that. Yeah.
Who's the most important or influential artist or writer that helped shape your frame of reference for wanting to begin the poetic process on Los Angeles? Was it Bukowski?
No.
Lynn?
No. For me, one of the most important contemporary poets is, and she still, this is true when I was 16 and read the first book of hers that I ever read, and now is Louise Glück. And that has to do with her tone and her mediation of the public and the private. I might be wrong, I don't think she's ever written a poem about LA. I know she never lived here. But I actually have, the literature of Los Angeles that means the most to me is nonfiction. So that's probably more where I draw from.
Is there like one book that
I think this is a really good book. This one that I read from, the Christopher Isherwood book. But yeah, I mean, obviously Joan Didion is a good place to start, go back to again, and decide you don't like, and then fall in love with again, and that's. Are you looking for a place to start, or you're just curious about my influence?
No, I'm just curious, like,
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. That's good. Thank you so much for all your nice questions.